Great. Thank you so much, Mary, for inviting me to join you and for being the inspiration behind this event. I'm very happy to be here. As Mary said, I live in Freeport, Maine with my husband and my daughter, just down the road from Wolf Neck Farm, opposite Wolf Neck State Park. Very happy to live in this wonderful area for about the last decade or so. And I always love the chance to connect with people in the local community, especially because I spend my working days working at the University of New Hampshire down in Durham, New Hampshire. I'm going to be talking tonight about a topic that I am incredibly passionate for. As Mary said, I do have a full-time job at the University of New Hampshire running our Sustainability Institute. But I also spend some of my volunteer time volunteering for the national nonprofit B Lab as a B Corp ambassador. I do that because I'm really passionate about this movement. When I think about what gives me hope and optimism for the future, it is in part that the business community, at least some parts of the business community, are voluntarily stepping up and opting in to really building an economy that is regenerative and works for all people and is really thinking about the future health of our planet. I've spent the last 15 years or so really studying the B Corp movement as an academic. When I was working on my PhD, my dissertation was focused on what I called at that time socially conscious capitalism. And it was in part really studying the emergence of the B Corp movement now over 12 or 13 years ago. I've spent the last decade really researching and teaching about this work. And I'll talk a little bit at the end about some of the work we're doing at UNH in that vein as well. But I'm going to share my screen and just share a few slides with you all about the B Corp movement, hopefully to give you a good understanding of kind of where it's come from and how it works. So let me just check I'm doing this right, Mary. Just give me a thumb up if you're seeing everything okay. Great, wonderful. So I thought I would just share, to begin with, a short video that was recently made by the nonprofit B Lab to give you a good introduction.
Throughout history, humankind has created a multitude of different economic and social systems. Traditional systems, absolutism, feudalism, communism, capitalism, the list goes on. And while systems are complex, the truth is they were built by people, so they can be changed by people. After all, humanity is interdependent with one another and with the planet. The problem is, this is often forgotten, and short-term gains are prioritized over long-term value. Me over we, now over the future, inequity over justice, profits over people and planet. Leading to this and this. All of which are negative impacts of our current economic system. But it doesn't have to be this way. We can transform from profiting only the few to benefiting all, from concentrating wealth and power to ensuring equity, from extraction to regeneration, and from individualism to interdependence. It is not an unreachable ideal. It is the reality that we, the B Corp movement, are already building. All around the world, we enable companies to improve their social and environmental impact with our standards and tools. We certify and engage businesses that meet these standards. We catalyse public policies that expand businesses' accountability beyond just to shareholders. We steward communities and collective action and amplify the stories of people using business as a force for good. The B Corp movement, led by B Lab and Systema Bay, positively impacts nearly 300,000 workers at over 4,000 companies in over 150 industries and 77 countries. Together, we're transforming the global economy to benefit all people, communities, and the planet. Together, we'll realise our vision of an inclusive, equitable and regenerative world. Join the movement.
So I think that video was a helpful introduction to the economy that we have really inherited over the last 50 years. It was just about 50 years ago that probably one of the most famous economists in the world, Milton Friedman, published a seminal piece in the New York Times, which really defined the sort of capitalist system we have been living under for the last 50 years. As many of you know, he's most famous for saying that the only social responsibility of business is to maximize profits or returns for shareholders, and that all other considerations of employees, suppliers, the communities in which those businesses operate, the planet, were really the responsibility of others, particularly the government or nonprofits. And so he had no place, he really believed that paying attention to those concerns would reduce or constrain profits and therefore reduce returns to shareholders. And, those ideas were certainly amplified by many others, but have really shaped and have become very strong ideas that really have shaped how business has been taught in business schools, how the law courts have made business law decisions, and really how boards of directors and CEOs sort of see their obligation, their fiduciary responsibility. But I think what's really encouraging, and I'll just say, and I think, in the course of those 50 years, whilst, as Mary said, there have been some real benefits of the capitalist system, including job creation and innovation and other things, we have also started to really understand the negative consequences, those sort of negative externalities, as economists like to say, of some of the ways that we do business today without regard for people and planet. And I think the good news is that people are demanding better, right? Even if big business isn't changing, we are starting to see consumers and customers starting to ask for more. Certainly with the groups that I work with in universities, Generation Z and millennials, they are a generation who are supremely aware of the issues facing our world today, the climate crisis, racial injustice, poverty, inequity of all kinds. And they are a generation that wants to improve. They want to be leaders who help resolve some of those issues. And they are a generation who wants to buy from and work for and invest in companies that they think are aligned with their values. Just some statistics here, 80% of global consumers think that business must play a role in addressing societal issues. And 86% of employees really want their employers to step up, right, and be a company that they can be proud to work for. And we're starting to see shifts, right? We're starting to see CEOs like Larry Fink of BlackRock. Some of you may have read some of the things that he's been writing over the last few years, really kind of pushing companies, both public and private, to do more than just make money. Lovely quote here from Elizabeth Warren as well. We are starting to see a shift. I think personally that the Business Roundtable, they published just 2 years ago now, in August of 2019, they published a statement called the Statement on the Purpose of the Corporation. That we can have a long discussion about whether the potential of that statement has been realized. But I think we'll look back in 20 or 30 years and say that statement on the purpose of the corporation released by the Business Roundtable really was a turning point in a new, more stakeholder-focused version of capitalism. This was a statement that was released by the Business Roundtable. It's a traditionally pretty conservative group. It is made up of the CEOs of over 200 of the largest companies in America. So for them to come out, essentially, without explicitly saying we are sort of disagreeing with Milton Friedman, they were basically disagreeing with Milton Friedman, finally after 50 years, to say that businesses must start to pay attention to issues of people and planet. Otherwise, they will not survive and will not be really fulfilling their mandate in the world. So that's all by way of saying that I believe, and why I'm hopeful, is that we are starting to see an evolution of business. The 20th century was really, I would say, characterized by this sort of shareholder capitalism, really the Milton Friedman idea of shareholder wealth maximization at all costs. Very much a sort of a model that was like extractive, pretty exclusive in terms of who benefits. And we're moving now to more, in the 21st century, more what I would call and what many others are calling stakeholder capitalism. And it's really starting to think about an economy that is more regenerative, more inclusive, and more equitable for all. So we're talking primarily tonight about the idea of certified B corporations. Many of you may already be familiar with some of the product certifications that we've seen come out in the last 20 years or so. Things like the USDA organic certification, Fair Trade, Rainforest Alliance, LEED for buildings, et cetera, et cetera. They are all wonderful certifications. They all have their pros and cons, but I'm sure like me, you buy many of these products. They really helped us as consumers understand kind of what was some of the better products we could buy if we care about these topics of people and planet. What I think is exciting about the B Corp movement is that it's a mechanism by which we can understand what are the really good companies, not just who makes good products, but more holistically, who are the companies behind the products we're making? How do they treat their employees? How do they treat their suppliers? What impact are they having on local communities and the planet? And so that's really what certified B Corps are about. It's really about helping us as consumers and as investors really determine the difference between genuinely good companies and just companies who are good at marketing. Many of you have heard the term greenwashing, I'm sure. We want to get away from greenwashing, right? As consumers, we want to really understand the depth of how a company is really benefiting multiple stakeholders. So there's a nonprofit now, a global nonprofit that is behind this movement. It was founded in 2007, and they now have partners all over the world that is really helping. Primarily, the bulk of B Corps are still here in the United States, but many coming up around the world as well. So a way to think about B Corp certification is that it really is to a company what fair trade is to coffee, or LEED certification is to a building. So really the idea here is we're certifying the whole company in terms of all of its policies and its practices. So there's a lot of companies that are now over 4,500 certified B Corps now around the world. We've seen really exponential growth in that just really in the last year or two. It took almost a decade to get to 4,000, but now we're starting to see this sort of real exponential growth. So many of the brands here that you will be familiar with, including many here in New England, like Stonyfield, Cabot Creamery, Tom's of Maine, etc. Ben & Jerry's also. And I'm really proud, together with a group of people, including one of the ones you'll hear from tonight, there's a wonderful community of founders and CEOs and leaders of B Corps here in Maine. Again, some of the brands that you hopefully recognize and are hopefully customers of, companies in all parts of our economy. Great beer, great toothpaste, great coffee, great banking services, great renewable energy, great internet. So just some really great companies. I encourage you to check them out if you don't know any of these. So as I said, we're now up to about just over 4,500 B Corps around the world across many different industries and many countries as well. I want to just spend a few minutes talking about what is involved in B Corp certification. So it really is three things that companies choose to, this is a completely voluntary, that companies choose to opt into this. So one is they have to have to prove their social and environmental performance. And so at the heart of B Corp certification is something called the B Impact Assessment, or the BIA. One of the reasons that I'm a B Corp ambassador, one of the reasons why I use it in the teaching that I do at UNH, is because I really think it is the most rigorous, comprehensive instrument for really looking at the entirety of a company's policies and practices. It is open source and it is free. So even if a company doesn't want to become B Corp certified, they can just register and they can use the B Impact Assessment just to get a baseline for how they're doing. So in that way, it's a really valuable, free consulting resource, if you like. For companies to get certified, you have to get a verified score of 80 or more out of 200 available points. And that may seem like a fairly low bar, but Bob will tell you later, just getting to 80 is really, really hard. The average company that takes the assessment gets 50 points or less. The second piece is accountability, and this is to do with the legal framework by which the company operates. And so when assuming a company gets to 80 or more points out of 200, they then have to amend their articles of incorporation and adopt a legal framework that allows and compels the business to consider all stakeholders in decision making. And then the last piece is transparency. And B Corps are explicitly signing up to make their score transparent, including on the B Corp directory. Companies have to recertify every 3 years, so it's not a one and done. Companies have to continue to prove that they are making an impact. And I'll also just add that the B Impact Assessment changes every 2 to 3 years as well. It gets harder and harder because the things that we know about social and environmental impact, those best practices are evolving all the time. So just a little bit more about what the B Impact Assessment looks like. There are about 300 questions in these 5 different areas. So one is around governance, and it does look at the company's mission and how it's governed, but it also looks at things like ethics and transparency. There's certainly a lot of questions that are around the way that the company treats its employees, community, looking at job creation, diversity, equity, inclusion, civic engagement, how the company purchases from local suppliers, etc. Not surprisingly, the environment's a big section. And then lastly on customers. And the customer section is really a specialized section for companies that have what they call a social impact business model, and that we can certainly get into that during Q&A if we have time. So again, I think I really like the B Impact Assessment because I think it is about creating a sustainability roadmap for any company, whether you want to become a certified B Corp or not. There's a great quote here from Ben Conniff, another main B Corp, Luke's Lobster. But it really helps a company get a baseline. It's confidential, and you can really understand what are we doing well and where do we have room for improvement. And it allows the company to really track performance over time. As I said to Mary, I do have hope for a number of reasons, and I think it's because we're starting to see we've got this fantastic tool at our disposal, the B Impact Assessment. It's free and it's available to everyone, and particularly in the last couple of years, even more so during the pandemic, we've been seeing companies just coming out of the woodwork and saying, we want to opt into this, right? We're starting to see entrepreneurs and founders and leaders, often from smaller companies, who say, we want to opt in to a better kind of business. We don't want to be the sort of business of the past. We want to build a business that is equitable and sustainable. I'm also, I think, optimistic because I'm just seeing the students that we work with at UNH and young people all over the country. They are so passionate about building a new kind of economy. Again, the kind of economy that they want to work for, the kind of economy they want to buy from, and they're jumping in. We have many students working with us to help with that. I'm going to come back to this in a second, but I just want to say that at UNH, we spend a lot of time thinking about sustainability as an institution. We're really proud to be a national leader in sustainability in higher education. We're one of only 10 institutions in the country that has a platinum stars rating, which is sort of like the B Corp certification for universities. And we're also Sierra Club's ninth coolest school in the country. And we care about that, not just because it makes us proud, but because of what it means we can do to help the region become more sustainable over time. And one of the things that this is where I spend a lot of time with my students and why I have so much hope, is that we have something called the Bee Impact Clinic. And students do this for academic credit. And we train them in the Bee Impact Assessment. And then we match them with local companies who want help going through the Bee Impact Assessment, and in many cases becoming B Corp certified. It's a free program for companies. And I just can't tell you how much enthusiasm and energy and brilliance the students bring to this work. They act as researchers and consultants and project managers for the companies that they're working with. And we're just seeing wonderful results from that. So I'm going to end there because I want to leave plenty of time for Bob, because you're going to hear really from a founder and CEO about why B Corp matters to them. And we can certainly get into other things during Q&A.